The call that would change everything came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Dad, you need to get here now." My daughter Emma's voice cracked through the phone, panic bleeding through every word. "The police are at the cabin. They found drugs, Dad. They found drugs in my bedroom." As I threw on my clothes and raced through the empty streets toward her ranch cabin, one thought hammered in my skull like a war drum. HOA Karen had finally played her nuclear card, and she had no idea she'd just declared war on the wrong family. I'd bought that cabin for Emma 2 years ago when she graduated college. It wasn't much, a modest 2-bedroom on 3 acres at the edge of Willowbrook Estates, but it was hers. A place where she could start her veterinary practice, build her life, maybe raise kids someday. The same cabin that Karen Middleton, our HOA president, had been trying to force us to sell for 18 months. The same cabin that had somehow become ground zero in Karen's personal vendetta against anyone who dared challenge her iron-fisted rule over our community. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, my heart nearly stopped. 3 patrol cars, their red and blue lights painting Emma's pale face in alternating colors of terror. She stood on her porch in pajamas, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her world together. The deputies, my deputies, though they didn't know it yet, were professional but thorough. They'd received an anonymous tip about drug activity at this address. Someone had called it in at 2 a.m., claiming they'd witnessed suspicious transactions and heard that the young woman living there was dealing to local teenagers. "Miss, we found this in your bedroom dresser." Deputy Martinez held up a clear plastic bag containing what looked like several ounces of methamphetamine. My stomach dropped to the ground. Emma's face went white as paper. "I've never seen that before in my life," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the radio chatter. "I don't understand. I don't even drink alcohol. How is this in my house?" That's when I noticed it. The lock on Emma's bedroom window was broken. Not just broken, carefully pried open from the outside, the kind of damage that takes time and planning. The kind of damage someone makes when they want it to look like a break-in, but don't want to trigger an alarm. My trained eye caught what the deputies missed in their focus on the drugs, fresh tool marks on the window frame, and more importantly, a partial boot print in the soft soil beneath the window. Size 7 women's hiking boot, Timberland brand, if I had to guess. "Dad, I swear to you, I have no idea how that got there." Emma grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in with desperate strength. "You have to believe me. Someone put this here. Someone broke into my house and planted this stuff." I looked into my daughter's eyes, the same eyes that had never lied to me in 24 years, the same eyes that had looked up at me with absolute trust when she was 5 and promised she hadn't eaten the cookies before dinner, even when chocolate was still smeared on her cheek. But this wasn't about cookies. This was about her future, her career, her freedom. The deputies were kind but firm. They had to take her in for questioning. Standard procedure when drugs are found on someone's property. As they read Emma her rights, my mind was already racing through the legal implications. Possession with intent to distribute. Minimum 5 years if convicted. Her veterinary license would be revoked. Her life, the life I'd worked so hard to give her, would be over before it really began. But here's what really made my blood run cold. This wasn't random. This wasn't some desperate addict looking for a place to stash their supply. The amount was too precise, too calculated. Exactly the quantity needed to trigger felony charges, but not so much that it would seem obviously planted. Someone had done their homework. Someone wanted to destroy my daughter specifically, methodically, permanently. As I followed the patrol cars to the station, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Maybe now your daughter will learn that some people don't belong in Willowbrook Estates. Some fights you just can't win." A concerned neighbor. I stared at those words, reading them 3 times before the full impact hit me. Karen. It had to be Karen. But how could I prove it? And more importantly, how could I save Emma without revealing who I really was? See, here's what Karen Middleton didn't know, as she was probably celebrating her victory with a glass of wine in her perfectly manicured living room. I wasn't just Emma's father. I wasn't just another resident she could bully and intimidate with her HOA power games. I was Sheriff Jake Morrison of Millbrook County, the man who'd been quietly living in her neighborhood for 3 years, watching her destroy families and terrorize residents from the shadows. I'd kept my profession private, buying the cabin under Emma's name, never wearing my uniform in the neighborhood, never flashing my badge or throwing my weight around. I believed in being a good neighbor first, a sheriff second. That philosophy had just cost my daughter her freedom, and Karen was about to learn the difference between messing with a regular dad and going to war with someone who'd spent 25 years learning how to hunt predators like her. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in the waiting room of my own sheriff's station, watching my own deputies process my daughter like any other suspect. Everything in me wanted to storm into that interrogation room, badge blazing, and end this nightmare with a single revelation. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I played this wrong, Karen would claim police corruption, family favoritism, abuse of power. She'd turn Emma's vindication into my career suicide and probably get the charges thrown out on a technicality. No, this had to be done right. This had to be done smart. But as I watched Emma disappear behind those steel doors, still in her pajamas, still clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 8, I made a promise that would have made Karen Middleton pack her bags and flee the state if she'd heard it. I was going to destroy her so completely, so methodically, and so publicly that she'd spend the rest of her life wishing she'd never heard the name Morrison. She wanted to play games with my family. Fine. But she was about to discover that some games have rules she never learned, and some opponents don't just fight back, they obliterate everything in their path. The war Karen started at 3:47 a.m. that Tuesday morning was going to end with her complete annihilation. She just didn't know it yet. To understand why Karen Middleton would risk everything to destroy my daughter, you have to understand the 18-month nightmare that led to that moment. It started innocently enough, a simple request to build a small barn on Emma's property for the animals she'd treat as a mobile veterinarian. Just a basic 20x30 structure, well within county regulations, properly set back from property lines, and completely reasonable for someone starting a veterinary practice. Karen's response arrived 3 days later in the form of a certified letter that read like a declaration of war. The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association hereby DENIE is your request for agricultural construction. Such structures are inconsistent with the upscale residential character of our community. The letter was signed with Karen's trademark flourish, a signature so elaborate it looked like she practiced it in the mirror. But it wasn't just the denial that caught my attention. It was the handwritten note scrolled at the bottom. Perhaps you should consider a more suitable neighborhood for your endeavors. That condescending tone, that barely concealed classism, it was pure Karen Middleton. See, Karen had appointed herself the guardian of Willowbrook's property values, which was really code for keeping out anyone who didn't fit her narrow vision of suburban perfection. Young professionals like Emma, minorities, families with children, anyone who worked with their hands, they were all threats to her precious kingdom. The fact that Emma was a single woman starting her own business made her an even bigger target. I should have seen the escalation coming when Emma decided to fight back. She researched the HOA bylaws, county regulations, and property rights law. She discovered that Karen had been denying legitimate requests for years, often exceeding her authority and violating homeowners' rights. Emma wasn't just fighting for her barn anymore. She was fighting for every resident Karen had bullied into submission. The first HOA meeting Emma attended was like watching David walk into Goliath's cave. 23 homeowners packed into the community center, most of them nodding along with everything Karen said like trained seals. Karen sat at the head table like a queen holding court, wearing a power suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. When Emma stood to present her case, Karen didn't even let her finish her first sentence. "Miss Morrison," Karen's voice dripped with fake sweetness, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but the board has already made its decision. Perhaps if you'd done your research before purchasing property here, you'd understand that Willowbrook Estates maintains certain standards." The room fell silent. Karen's eyes locked onto Emma's with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. Standards that some people seem to struggle with understanding. That was Karen's mistake, underestimating my daughter. Emma didn't back down. She pulled out her research, quoted chapter and verse of HOA law, and systematically dismantled every argument Karen made. She pointed out that Karen had approved a 40x60 workshop for her neighbor Tom Bradley just 6 months earlier. She highlighted the inconsistent application of rules, the lack of proper notice for board meetings, and the suspicious financial dealings where Karen's husband's landscaping company kept getting no-bid contracts for emergency community maintenance. By the time Emma finished, 3 other homeowners were asking questions about their own denied requests. Karen's face had gone from pale pink to deep red. She slammed her gavel so hard it cracked. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, gathering her papers like she was fleeing a crime scene. But as everyone filed out, I heard her whisper to her lieutenant, Margaret Walsh, "That little girl has no idea who she's messing with." The retaliation started within a week. Emma received a violation notice for having unauthorized livestock on her property, referring to her 2 rescue horses that had been there since she moved in. Another citation for improper yard maintenance because she'd let a small section of wildflowers grow in the back corner of her 3-acre lot. A third notice claiming her mailbox was non-conforming to community standards, despite being identical to every other mailbox in the neighborhood. Each violation came with escalating fines, $50, then $100, then $250. Emma fought everyone, showing up to appeals hearings with photographs, documentation, and legal precedents. She won every single appeal, but Karen kept finding new ways to make her life miserable. It was death by 1,000 cuts, a systematic campaign designed to exhaust Emma financially and emotionally until she gave up and moved away. But Karen made a critical error in judgment. She assumed Emma was fighting alone. She didn't know that every violation notice, every threatening letter, every condescending phone call was being forwarded to me. She didn't know that I was quietly documenting everything, building a case file that would have made my detectives proud. And she definitely didn't know that several other neighbors had started reaching out to Emma privately, sharing their own stories of Karen's abuse and tyranny. The breaking point came during the community barbecue last July. Emma had been invited by the Hendersons, an elderly couple who appreciated her veterinary help with their arthritic German Shepherd. She arrived with homemade potato salad and her characteristic optimism, hoping to mend fences with Karen and find some middle ground. Instead, she walked into a carefully orchestrated ambush. Karen had been drinking not enough to be obviously intoxicated, but enough to lower her inhibitions and reveal her true nature. She cornered Emma by the dessert table, speaking just loud enough for nearby neighbors to hear. "You know, Emma, I've been thinking about your situation. Maybe there's a way we can work together. My husband Rick knows some people in the county planning department. People who could make certain problems disappear, if you know what I mean." Emma's confusion must have shown on her face because Karen leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Of course, cooperation goes both ways. It would be such a shame if the county started looking into, say, unpermitted structures or business operations in residential zones, or, God forbid, anything more. Serious. The implication was crystal clear pay-up or face escalated consequences. That's when I knew Karen had crossed the line from petty harassment into criminal territory. Extortion, abuse of power, potentially bribery and corruption involving county officials. She'd just threatened my daughter in front of witnesses, and she was too arrogant to realize she'd sealed her own fate. But Emma, bless her heart, still believed in doing things the right way. She reported Karen's threat to the HOA board, filed complaints with the state attorney general's office, and even considered hiring a lawyer to sue for harassment. What she didn't know was that Karen had been down this road before. 3 families had tried to fight back over the years. 3 families had mysteriously faced escalating problems until they eventually sold their homes and left the neighborhood. One family's teenager had been arrested for vandalism based on anonymous tips. Another family's small business had been reported to the IRS for suspicious activity. The third family had faced a sudden code enforcement review that found dozens of violations that had never existed before. Karen's pattern was clear to me, but I couldn't share that insight without revealing my identity. I had to watch my daughter walk into the same trap that had destroyed 3 other families, knowing that Karen's nuclear option was coming. I just didn't expect her to be bold enough to plant drugs. I thought she'd stick to her usual playbook of bureaucratic warfare and social pressure. The night before Emma's arrest, Karen made her final mistake. She called Emma directly, her voice slurred with wine and victory. "I tried to be reasonable with you, dear. I really did. But some people just don't know when they're beaten. Tomorrow morning, you're going to understand that Willowbrook Estates isn't for everyone. Some of us belong here. Some of us don't. And the ones who don't? Well, they tend to find themselves in very difficult situations." Emma recorded that call. She was scared, confused, and desperate enough to start documenting Karen's threats. What she didn't realize was that she'd just handed me the key to Karen's destruction. Because when you're sheriff of the county and someone threatens your daughter, and then your daughter ends up arrested on planted drug charges 12 hours later, that's not just harassment anymore. That's a felony conspiracy that's about to destroy Karen Middleton's entire world. The hardest part of the next 72 hours wasn't watching Emma sit in a jail cell, though that nearly killed me. It wasn't coordinating with her lawyer while pretending to be just another worried father, though that took every ounce of my acting ability. The hardest part was sitting across from Detective Sarah Chen, my own lead investigator, and letting her brief me on my daughter's case without revealing that I knew exactly who was behind it and why. "Sheriff, we've got an interesting situation with the Morrison case," Chen said, spreading crime scene photos across my desk. "The drugs were planted, no question about it. Window forced from outside, no fingerprints on the bag. Substance is pure enough to suggest professional distribution rather than personal use. Problem is, we have no suspects and no clear motive." She paused, studying my face. "The victim claims it's related to an HOA dispute, but that seems like a stretch. Who plants felony-level drugs over a property disagreement? Someone who's been escalating criminal behavior for 18 months and thinks she's untouchable." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded thoughtfully and asked, "What's your next move?" Chen explained they were canvassing neighbors, checking security cameras, and looking into Emma's background for any connection to drug activity. Standard procedure that would take weeks and probably turn up nothing useful. Meanwhile, Emma sat in county lockup, her veterinary license suspended pending investigation, her entire future hanging by a thread. That night, I made a decision that could have ended my career if it backfired. I was going to conduct my own parallel investigation, using resources and techniques that weren't available to regular citizens while maintaining complete deniability. If anyone discovered what I was doing, I'd claim I was just a concerned father doing his own research. But I wasn't going to let Karen Middleton destroy my daughter while hiding behind legal technicalities and plausible deniability. My first stop was the County Courthouse Records Office. Public records are beautiful things when you know how to read them. Karen's husband, Rick, had pulled building permits for 17 different properties in Willowbrook Estates over the past 3 years, all through emergency exemptions that bypassed normal bidding processes. Total value, $847,000 in landscaping and maintenance contracts. Karen's signature was on every approval as HOA president. That's conspiracy and fraud, but I needed more. Next, I accessed phone records through a legitimate warrant request related to Emma's case. The anonymous tip that led to the drug raid came from a prepaid cell phone purchased with cash at a Walmart 12 miles outside town. The purchase was made at 11:47 p.m. the night before Emma's arrest. Security footage from that Walmart showed a woman in a hooded jacket, sunglasses, and baseball cap clearly trying to hide her identity. But she made a mistake. She paid with a credit card for a bottle of water after buying the phone with cash. The credit card belonged to Margaret Walsh, Karen's closest ally on the HOA board. I had Karen's lieutenant purchasing the phone used to frame my daughter, but I still needed to connect Karen directly to the drug planting. That's when I remembered the boot print under Emma's window. Size 7 women's Timberland hiking boots. I needed to get a look at Karen's footwear without a warrant I couldn't legally obtain. The solution came during the community yard sale 2 days later. I showed up as just another neighbor looking for bargains, making small talk and keeping my eyes open. Karen was there, of course, supervising the event like a general commanding troops. She wore designer jeans, a crisp white blouse, and size 7 Timberland hiking boots with fresh scratches on the soles and traces of the distinctive red clay soil from Emma's property still embedded in the treads. But here's what made my blood pressure spike. Karen wasn't trying to hide anything. She was flaunting her victory. When Mrs. Peterson asked about Emma's arrest, Karen's response was pure arrogance. Well, I hate to say, I told you so, but some people just don't belong in our community. When you let the wrong element in, drugs and crime follow. Thank goodness, someone was vigilant enough to report the suspicious activity before it spread to other families. She was standing there wearing the boots she'd used to break into my daughter's home, spinning Emma's frame job into a heroic act of community protection. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. But it was also incredibly stupid because Karen was creating more evidence with every self-congratulatory word. I just hope this serves as a warning to others who might think our community standards are negotiable, Karen continued, her voice carrying across the whole yard sale. Willowbrook Estates has a reputation to maintain. We can't let one bad apple spoil the whole barrel. Margaret Walsh nodded along enthusiastically, probably unaware that her credit card purchase had already tied her to the conspiracy. That afternoon, I found the final piece of the puzzle. Emma's security system had been malfunctioning the night of the break-in, cameras offline, motion sensors disabled. But the system showed it had been manually shut down using the master override code at 11:23 p.m. That code was only known to 3 people: Emma, the security company, and Rick Middleton, whose landscaping crew had installed the system 8 months earlier as part of his no-bid HOA contract. Rick had given Karen the codes. Karen had recruited Margaret to buy the phone. Together, they'd planned and executed a home invasion and evidence planting designed to destroy Emma's life and drive her from the neighborhood. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was organized crime masquerading as suburban homeowner association politics. But Karen's arrogance was about to become her downfall in ways she couldn't imagine. Because while she was busy playing the victim and the hero simultaneously, I was building a federal case that would put her away for decades. Drug trafficking, home invasion, evidence tampering, conspiracy, extortion, fraud, and about 6 other felonies that she'd committed while thinking she was above the law. The breaking point came when Karen made her biggest mistake yet. She called Emma in jail. Not once, but 3 times over 2 days, always from different numbers, always with the same message. This could all go away if Emma would just sign a statement admitting guilt and agreeing to sell her property immediately. The calls were automatically recorded by the jail system, and Karen was too arrogant to use code words or speak carefully. "Emma, dear, I know you're scared, but this doesn't have to ruin your whole life." Karen's voice dripped false sympathy through the phone recording. "I have connections in the district attorney's office. People who understand that good people sometimes make mistakes. If you really cooperate, I might be able to help you get a reduced sentence. Maybe even probation if you're willing to admit you have a problem and need help." Emma's response was exactly what I'd raised her to say. "Mrs. Middleton, I didn't put those drugs in my house, and I'm not going to lie and say I did." But Karen kept pushing, getting more specific with each call until she finally revealed her hand completely. "The bottom line is simple, Emma. You can fight this and spend 5 to 10 years in prison, losing everything you've worked for. Or you can be smart, take responsibility, sell your property to someone more suitable for our community, and start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere more appropriate for someone with your background." That last phrase, "someone with your background," was Karen's tell. It revealed what this had always been about: class warfare disguised as law enforcement. Emma wasn't from old money like Karen. She worked for a living, got her hands dirty, built her life from nothing. In Karen's twisted worldview, that made her unworthy of Willowbrook Estates, no matter what the law said about property rights and equal treatment. Those recorded calls were the final nails in Karen's coffin. Witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud, all captured in her own voice, all admissible in court. She'd been so confident in her power, so certain she was untouchable, that she'd created a perfect trail of evidence leading directly to her doorstep. But I still had one more card to play. Because Karen Middleton had no idea that the regular dad she'd been taunting for 18 months was about to reveal himself as the one person in the county with the power to bring her entire criminal enterprise crashing down around her. She thought she was dealing with a helpless victim. She was about to discover she'd been playing chess with the sheriff, and checkmate was one move away. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. It was time for Karen to meet the real Jake Morrison. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. Karen had called it herself, claiming she had important updates regarding the recent criminal activity in our community. What she actually had was a prepared speech about why Emma should be permanently banned from Willowbrook Estates and how the HOA needed to implement enhanced screening procedures to prevent future incidents. What she didn't have was any idea that she was about to walk into the most devastating ambush of her life. I arrived at the community center at 6:45, 15 minutes early, wearing my full sheriff's uniform for the first time in the neighborhood. Badge polished, insignia gleaming, every inch the authority figure I'd kept hidden for 3 years. The few early arrivals did double takes, whispering among themselves. "Is that Emma's father? Why is he in uniform?" They had no idea they were about to witness the end of Karen Middleton's reign of terror. Karen strutted in at exactly 7, wearing her power suit like armor, carrying a leather portfolio thick with papers she'd never get to present. She was flanked by Margaret Walsh and 3 other board members who'd enabled her criminal enterprise for years. Karen's eyes swept the packed room, nearly 40 residents, the largest turnout in HOA history, and she smiled with predatory satisfaction. In her twisted mind, this was her moment of ultimate triumph. Then she saw me. The blood drained from Karen's face so fast I thought she might collapse. She stopped dead in the doorway, her portfolio slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers, papers scattering across the floor. "Mr. Morrison," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you?" What are you doing herein?" She couldn't even finish the sentence. The sight of my uniform had short-circuited her brain. "Good evening, Karen," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "I am here in my capacity as Sheriff of Millbrook County. I have some information about my daughter's case that I thought the community should hear." I stood slowly, every eye in the room following my movement. "You see, we've made some remarkable progress in our investigation. Turns out, Emma was right all along. Someone did plant those drugs in her house. Someone with access to her security codes. Someone with size 7 Timberland hiking boots, and someone stupid enough to leave a paper trail that leads directly to this room." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Margaret Walsh had gone pale as paper, her hands trembling as she fumbled for her purse. But I wasn't done. 3 years of watching Karen destroy families, 18 months of seeing her terrorize my daughter, and 4 days of watching Emma sit in jail for crimes she didn't commit had built up a pressure that was finally finding release. "Margaret," I continued, my voice conversational but carrying the authority of 25 years in law enforcement, "that prepaid phone you bought at Walmart the night before Emma's arrest? The one used to call in the anonymous tip? Yeah, we found it. And the security footage. And your credit card receipt." Margaret made a strangled noise and bolted for the door, but Deputy Martinez was waiting outside. I'd learned from Karen's playbook, always have backup plans. "Rick," I turned to Karen's husband, who was trying to blend into the wall. "Those security codes you gave your wife to disable Emma's alarm system? That's breaking and entering, conspiracy to commit burglary, and about 6 other felonies. Your landscaping contracts are also under federal investigation for fraud and bid rigging. Hope those no-bid deals were worth it." The room was dead silent except for the sound of Karen's ragged breathing. She was trapped, cornered, and finally understanding that the regular dad she'd been tormenting for 18 months was the one person in the county with the power to destroy her completely. But even then, even facing complete annihilation, Karen's arrogance wouldn't let her surrender quietly. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You can't prove anything. This is harassment, abuse of power, corruption. I'll have your badge for this." She drew herself up to her full height, channeling 3 years of tyrannical authority. "I am the president of this HOA, and I won't be intimidated by some overgrown small-town cop who thinks he can." "Karen," I interrupted quietly, "shut up." The simple command, delivered with absolute authority, hit her like a physical blow. For the first time in years, someone had told Karen Middleton to shut up, and she actually did it. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, pulling out my phone and setting it on the table. "I'm going to play some recordings for everyone. Phone calls you made to my daughter in jail, trying to coerce her into confessing to crimes she didn't commit. Want to hear your own voice explaining how you have connections in the DAI's office? How you can make charges disappear if Emma just admits guilt and sells her property to someone more suitable for the neighborhood?" I pressed play. Karen's voice filled the room, dripping with false sympathy and barely concealed threats. "Emma, dear, I know you're scared, but this doesn't have to ruin your whole life. I have connections in the district attorney's office. People who understand that good people sometimes make mistakes." The reaction was immediate and devastating. Gasps, angry mutters, someone shouting, "Oh my God." Karen tried to speak, to explain, to justify, but I held up my hand for silence. The recording continued, each word another nail in her coffin, each sentence revealing the depth of her criminal conspiracy. When it finished, the room erupted in outrage. "You did this?" Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked with fury. "You destroyed that poor girl's life over a barn?" Tom Bradley stood up, his face red with anger. "How many other families have you done this to? How many people left the neighborhood because of your lies?" The crowd was turning into a mob, and Karen was the target of their righteous fury. But I wasn't finished. I had one more revelation that would ensure Karen never recovered from this night. "There's something else everyone should know," I announced, my voice cutting through the chaos. Karen's harassment campaign against my daughter wasn't her first rodeo. Over the past 4 years, 3 other families have faced escalating problems after crossing the HOA board. The Hendersons' teenager arrested for vandalism? Anonymous tip from a prepaid phone. The Martinez family's tax audit? Anonymous report claiming business irregularities. The Browns' code enforcement nightmare? All of it traced back to the same pattern of harassment, intimidation, and evidence manipulation. The room fell silent again as the full scope of Karen's criminal enterprise became clear. This wasn't just about Emma. This wasn't just about a barn or property values or community standards. This was about a criminal organization masquerading as a homeowner association, systematically destroying anyone who dared challenge their authority. "Karen Middleton," I said formally, reaching for my handcuffs, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, evidence tampering, breaking and entering, extortion, witness intimidation, fraud, and about 12 other felonies that my prosecutors are still counting. You have the right to remain silent." The Miranda rights seemed to echo forever in that silent room. Karen stood frozen as I cuffed her hands behind her back, her empire collapsing around her in real time. Margaret Walsh was already in custody outside. Rick would be arrested within the hour. The HOA's bank accounts would be frozen pending investigation. Their criminal enterprise was finished. But as I led Karen toward the door, she made one final, desperate play. "Wait!" she screamed, her voice breaking with panic. "I can explain everything. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Emma was going to ruin everything we built here. The property values, the community standards, everything. I was protecting our neighborhood. I was protecting our investment. You don't understand, someone like her doesn't belong here." That afternoon, I made my final preparations. Jim Fletcher had spent 3 days preparing a presentation that would, in his words, permanently end this dispute. I'd had multiple conversations with county officials, state regulatory agencies, and several industrial contractors. Everything was in place. The Ridgeview Community Center was packed when I arrived. Word had spread through all 3 HOA communities that tonight would be the final showdown with the Harrison Ranch. I counted at least 60 people in attendance, more than I'd ever seen at a Valley gathering. Margaret had clearly orchestrated this for maximum impact. She'd positioned herself at the head table with 4 other board members, all wearing matching navy blazers like some kind of suburban militia uniform. Professional cameras were set up to record the proceedings. She'd even brought what appeared to be a court reporter. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret began, calling the meeting to order with theatrical formality, "tonight we address a situation that has threatened our community's welfare for far too long. Before we proceed with our legal resolution, Mr. David Harrison has requested time to address the board." I stood up slowly, carrying a single manila folder to the front of the room. The crowd's murmur died to complete silence. As I positioned myself behind the podium Margaret had set up for her victory speech. "Thank you for accommodating this emergency meeting," I began, making eye contact with faces throughout the crowd. "I think it's time we cleared up some fundamental misunderstandings about Clearwater Valley." Margaret leaned forward, probably expecting some kind of surrender or plea for mercy. "First, let me address the legal action you're threatening. Margaret, you mentioned documented violations that endanger community welfare. I'm curious about the legal basis for that claim. The HOA has clear authority to protect community standards." "Actually, you don't." I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. According to county records, the Clearwater Valley HOA has jurisdiction over properties within your 3 residential developments. That's approximately 240 acres total. I looked around the room. The Harrison Ranch encompasses 2,847 acres, none of which fall under HOA authority. Property boundaries don't override community welfare concern, but they do override your legal standing to take any action whatsoever regarding our ranch operations. I pulled out another document. This is a cease and desist order from the county attorney's office, delivered this afternoon to your association's registered address. You are prohibited from further interference with ranch operations, blocking access roads, or harassing our employees. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Margaret's confident expression faltered for the first time. However, I continued, raising my voice slightly, that's not why I asked to speak tonight. I'm here because your association has raised some valid points about community welfare and property value. Margaret looked confused. This wasn't going according to her script. See, while you've been focused on eliminating our ranch, I've been reviewing my family's complete property holdings in this valley. And you're right, it's time for some changes. I pulled out a geological survey map and held it up for everyone to see. This shows the natural gas deposit under our south pasture. Small-scale operation, but with modern extraction technology, quite viable. The room went dead quiet. I've been in discussions with Apex Energy Solutions about developing this resource. They estimate an 18-month drilling and extraction timeline, followed by ongoing production operations. I smiled at Margaret's horrified expression. Completely legal under mineral rights that predate all